As the operational and strategic requirements evolve for the future force, so must the way that the department makes program decisions around them. These decisions have to be backed by rigorous, independent data and analytics. Discussing this topic today will be the Honorable Robert O. Work, 32nd Deputy Secretary of Defense and Chairman of the Board for Govini. He'll be joined by the Honorable Susanna Blume. Susanna serves as the Director of Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation, where she's responsible for providing analysis to the Secretary and Deputy Secretary of Defense. Susanna and Bob, welcome to the stage.
I have the pleasure to be here with one of the most important people in the Department of Defense who isn't very well known. Susanna Blume is a Renaissance woman. She got her undergraduate degree in art from George Washington University. While she was there, she was interning at the Department of Defense in policy, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, and she was a research assistant at the War College. I don't know who it was, Susanna, but some smart person said, this is a talent we can't let go. One of the reasons being that not only was she going to school at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, where she was working on her master's in international relations, but she was bored, so she went to George Washington and got her law degree simultaneously. She came into the Department of Defense, worked in policy, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, primarily enforced plans and postures, things like that, and then she made a name for herself in policy and went up to the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy's office and worked there. I don't know how we came to know each other when I was the Deputy Secretary of Defense, but she came on my staff and there was no way I was ever going to let her go. She is that good. She worked a lot of policy issues. She worked wargaming issues. She worked classified issues. And in the last couple years of my time there, she was my interface with cost assessment program evaluation. So she became steeped in programming and the entire Department of Defense program. I'm telling you, there is no finer professional in the Department of Defense than Susanna Blume. And she is now the director of CAPE. In fact, I was able to introduce her at her confirmation hearing. So today we're going to be talking about data, but we'll talk about several other things that are going on in the Department of Defense. Before we jump into that, Susanna, since I know everybody in the audience is interested, what are your prognostications on whether we get a short-term CR to March, whether we have a government shutdown, whether we have a year-long CR? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, first of all, thank you for that lovely introduction. It's delightful to be here with you again. I think, I'm not a betting person, so I'm not going to place a bet, but here are my hopes. I think everybody in this audience is well acquainted with the harmful effects of long continuing resolutions and government shutdowns. Not only do they waste an enormous amount of resources, but they waste time, which we can never recapture. I think the department feels a tremendous sense of urgency to continue to evolve, to be able to meet the threats of the present day and the future. And we're hamstrung if we're 6 months delayed every single year in being able to start new programs, move money around, make those kinds of adjustments, and you can never, ever get that time back. It's just lost. Not only that, particularly once you get into the space of government shutdowns, sequestration, et cetera, you're really messing up people's lives, right? People can't PCS, they can't get their kids into school, we can't build new child development centers to get childcare for our service members, and so the list of harms is longer than my arm. I think Congress has time to do the right thing. My hope is that we'll get one more short CR and then an appropriation, and we can finally move out on our very carefully laid plans for fiscal year 2024.
I don't think it's maybe it's widely known, but if we don't get those 12 appropriation bills done by 1 March, I think sequestration triggers on 1 April with a 10% automatic cut. And we both lived through sequestration, so we know how damaging that is. So you think maybe a short-term CR to March, and then we have a budget.
That's very much my hope. Congress still has time to avoid that fate, and that's what we're all rooting for.
Okay. To the subject of the day, when Deputy Secretary Hicks became the deputy, she said it was her intent to make the Department of Defense a data-centric organization and data-driven decisions. How successful has the department moved in that strategy?
I think there's been a lot of progress, and there's a lot of cause for optimism, but obviously there's a lot of work still to be done. And I think their challenges can kind of be bucketed in two different columns. The first being kind of cultural barriers, and the second being, I'll call them technical barriers. I think that where I have truly seen a lot of progress is on the cultural side. It's just not acceptable anymore to hoard data like it was, even not that long ago. I mean, there really has been a cultural shift led by the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary that we can't afford to be unself-aware. And really that's what data is, right? It lets you see yourself. An enterprise as large as the Department of Defense needs to be self-aware. We need to know, what we look like in order to make good choices. And so, I think that in and of itself is huge. With the new Chief Data and AI Officer, I think that all corners of the department are seeing the power of data to improve our ability to make decisions and act efficiently, and that's really important. That second bucket, that kind of technical bucket, I don't mean to make light of it. I mean, there are real meaningful challenges in that space, kind of two types. One being data just doesn't exist because we don't collect it, right? The other being data maybe exists, but it's not accessible because the IT system it's riding on is outdated and can't communicate with others or what have you. But in a sense, those problems I think are actually a bit more tractable once you've got your culture right. You can just start working down the list. And that's the hard work that's going on right now, led by the senior leadership of the department and certainly, Craig Martell and his team at CDAO.
So when we were working together in the department, many times I'd ask you to go down to a agency or a MilDep and say, share your freaking data.
Yeah.
So you're saying we're kind of beyond that now?
I'm not saying it never happens anymore, but the instances are far fewer. Even in the 3 years that I've been in this job, the number of times that a data access issue elevates to my level has dropped significantly. Folks are really able to work those things out at the working level, again, at least as a matter of culture. Technical obstacles persist, but we're working on them.
Now, did the deputy establish any benchmarks to say how you are progressing towards this data-centric organization?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, the whole effort is about being able to measure our progress. It comes back to that kind of fundamental point of self-awareness, and there are lots of different metrics that we look at and track. Pretty raw, gross indicators like how many different data sets are we pulling into kind of centralized places? Are those still manual pulls, or are we able to push in an automated fashion? And things like that. She's always looking for data about the state of our data as an important indicator of whether or not we're making progress here.
And just having data doesn't help you unless you're analyzing it.
Yeah.
And I know there have been a lot of improvements, or at least new changes to the analytical approach in the department. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that that I am most proud of, with many other colleagues who contributed to the effort here, is we'll call it the revitalization of strategic joint analysis in the department through the analysis working group, which the Deputy Secretary instantiated as one of her very early efforts not long after she was confirmed. And as you well know from your time as Deputy Secretary when I worked with you, the old support to strategic analysis had kind of collapsed under its own weight a little bit. and we'd just lost a really critical community of interest, way to share information and tools and things like that. Those muscles had just kind of atrophied in the department. And so when we looked to stand up the AWG, we were very, very deliberate about not making those same mistakes. We always try to make new mistakes, right? And so, rather than fixate and focus on developing a single set of assumptions that everybody had to use for their analysis, we've taken the 180 degrees opposite approach, where we want people exploring all kinds of excursions and sensitivities as long as we can compare the results of those analytic efforts, right? So if the J8 has done a piece of analysis and the Navy has done a piece of analysis and they have wildly different conclusions on the same set of questions, we want to know why. And knowing why is really the key to making a better decision in the end. But all of that analysis, just as you say, needs access to good quality data across the enterprise to support it. So another key effort of the AWG is building and maintaining data sets that are available to the entire department to use in their own analytic efforts.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the strategic analysis kind of collapsed under its own weight, but one of the key things that was happening, if you recall, and I know you do, was Congress kept giving us every year, you've got to cut the civilian workforce by 10%. Mm-hmm. Next year, you've got to cut the civilian workforce by 15%. And unfortunately, in those cuts, the analytical community was disproportionately hit.
Yeah.
Have we rebuilt back the talent necessary, the data wranglers, the data scientists, the analytical people? Have we started to build that back?
We're on that road. So there was a little bit of growth in terms of manpower, not just in OSD, but also in the services in 23. We've requested some more, again, not just for CAPE or OSD, but for the Joint Staff Services as well in our 24 budget request. So again, hoping for that appropriation, we can continue to make progress on that front. I think with a little bit more planned for the future, if Congress continues to agree that this is an area worth pursuing, which they really have in the past. They've been very supportive. Going back to a couple of key GAO reports, as well as the 2018 NDS Independent Review Commission also identified this as a gap that needed some resources applied, and Congress has supported us in rebuilding that community.
So where are we headed on this journey towards the data-centric? What's coming next?
Yeah, I think that, again, it is principally, in my view now, about continuing to grind away at those barriers on the technical side that I mentioned. We really need to buy down our technical debt, update our IT systems. That very much is a work in progress, but there's a ways still to go. And we need to, further automate collection of more information, more data, in order to continue to grow the information that analysts across the enterprise at all levels as well, not just the strategic level, but down at the tactical level in units as well. Knowing more about the usage of their vehicles so they can make better decisions about maintaining them, for example, things like that.
Speaking of that, where are the biggest gaps in data in the Department of Defense right now?
Some of the biggest challenges that I see are actually about connecting different kinds of data, rather than having a big hole in your data in the first place, right? And that's where I've spent a lot of time and attention kind of thinking about how can we, in an automated way, marry programming data through financial management, appropriator type data to execution, contracting data. How do we link those together in an automated way that enables our analysts to understand instantly, is this program executing a plan or not?
Can artificial intelligence help in that regard, or are there any plans to try to bring that in?
Yeah, definitely. I think AI is a general purpose technology. There's space to leverage it, all the way from the tip of the spear back to the handle, right? To torture an analogy. And I think that as we continue to look for ways again to leverage IT and AI and other technologies to kind of flag something for an analyst, right? To see a trend and surface something that needs a closer look from a human. That's certainly something we think about how to leverage it on the analytics side.
Another fruitful use of data is in modeling and simulation. Can you hum a few bars on how the department's doing there?
Yeah, so we, and by we I don't just mean CAPE, I mean the principals in the analysis working group, which includes policy, J7, J8, and the CDAO together, are with our service counterparts, are looking at building that next generation of modeling and simulation capability, in addition to other components of OSD to include R&E in particular. Our campaign modeling tools were state of the art at one point. They're just showing their age a little bit at this juncture. I don't think we're going to see kind of a single replacement of the campaign model, but we're exploring developing a diversity of tools, leveraging work that's already gone on in the services to make, say, an Air Force model available across the enterprise. Pretty modest investment that really enhances the capability of the analytic community across the whole department.
What's your biggest concern on whether or not, what is the thing that is keeping the department from really being able to leverage data at scale?
Well, if it was just one thing, we probably would have found it and fixed it by now, right? The hard part is that it's complicated. As I say, I think that we've made real meaningful progress on the culture around data. I think that the value proposition is clear to leaders across the department in a way that it perhaps wasn't always historically. Updating our IT systems costs money. It also costs time, right? So for systems that need to run all the time, that cannot fail, and I'm thinking right now in terms of like our financial management systems, right? People have to keep getting paid. The challenge involved in updating some of those things without kind of saying, okay, we're going to take a 6-month break now while we figure out how to modernize X. That's not an acceptable answer for the department. And so the challenges are many and complex, but we're working away at them.
What questions have I not asked you?
Well, we could talk about the strategy. We could talk about Replicator.
I'd love to talk about Replicator, and I'm sure everybody's really interested in what you might be able to say about it.
Yeah. I think the important thing to remember is that Replicator is not a system or even a collection of systems or a platform. It's a process, right? Fundamentally, what Replicator is about gripping up all of the authorities that the department already has and applying a pretty intense amount of senior leader attention to see how fast we can field something at scale. We're very much on track with the plan that the Deputy Secretary has set out for the department. She's very ably supported by Doug Beck and DIU, with participation from folks across the department, to include us and Cape and Comptroller, figuring out how to pay the bill. And, she's in December, she made her initial selection of capabilities. We're in the process of talking to our committees of jurisdiction over on the Hill right now about what that looks like, and we're on path. But again, the important thing to remember is it's really about, can we figure out how to field at scale fast with the authorities that we have today? I think the answer is going to be yes. And certainly that's what we're all driving towards.
So when might we see the first Replicator systems?
Well, have set out a goal, 18 to 24 months. And so that's what we're shooting for.
I meant, when might we see something go into production?
Well, again, we need to get through our communications with our committees of jurisdiction over on the Hill first, straighten out our acquisition strategy, and make sure we've got money in the right places, and then we'll see.
Very cool. I can't tell you how much better I sleep at night knowing you're at Cape and knowing that you're overseeing the development of the program.
That's good because I've been sleeping terribly, Bob.
But thank you so much for coming over this afternoon. I know you're busy. You probably had a lot of other things you could have been doing, but being able to come over and share your thoughts with the audience has just been tremendous. And on a personal note, it's just great seeing you again.
It's good to see you too. It's been my pleasure.
So I'd like you to, join me in thanking Susanna for coming over and for her comments.